Hello, everyone. So sorry. Welcome to the delayed McKitterick Prize discussion for the Society of Authors, part of the Society of Authors at Home Festival. In a normal year, we would have celebrated these amazing women in the beautiful Southern Cathedral and all had martinis and toasted them. And due to our extraordinary circumstances, we're doing it like this. But I actually think it's even more fun in a weird way because we get to really discuss these books, which I love so much. All three of them, they're just extraordinary. Just for everyone's knowledge, all sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, I think the link will be below, but it's www.gofundme.com, Authors Emergency Fund. And we want to thank our sponsors for the prizes, the ALCS, the Nicholas Allen, and the Paul Torday family for their generosity. And remember that during this, you can interact and ask questions, which we will get to in the last 15 minutes of our chat. So to introduce me, I'm Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott. I am the author of a book called Swan Song that was the very proud winner of the McKitterick Prize last year. It was also longlisted for the 2019 Women's Prize for Fiction. It was shortlisted for the Goldsboro Glass Bell, and it was named Book of the Year by the Evening Standard and one of 2 debuts listed Books of the Year in the Times for 2018. I'm a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, and I earned my MA from UEA's Prose Fiction program. And pre-publication, Swan Song was the winner of the Bridport Prize and the Lucy Cavendish, shortlisted for the Lucy Cavendish Prize, along with Sara Collins, who you'll meet momentarily. The Historical Novel Society New Novel Award, and others. As a screenwriter, I've been honored by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for the Nicholl Fellowships in Screenwriting, and I'm currently adapting Swan Song for the TV. I am now going to introduce these amazing women who I'm so excited to chat with, and then I'm going to let them introduce their books and give us just a short reading. So first up is the winner of the 2020 McKitterick Prize, Claire Adam, the author of Golden Child. So Claire was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and lived there until the age of 18, where she left for the US to study physics at Brown University. You should have been better with all of the technology. After graduating from Brown, Claire moved to Europe and lived in Italy and Ireland for a few years before settling in London, where she pursued her master's in creative writing at Goldsmiths and was shortlisted there for the Pat Kavanagh Award. Golden Child is her first novel, published by Faber in the UK, Hogarth Press, and was selected by Sarah Jessica Parker for her imprint SJP for Hogarth. Golden Child was the winner of the McKitterick Prize, as well as the Desmond Elliott Prize and the Authors Club Best First Novel, and has been longlisted for the Jollick Prize and the Edinburgh Festival First Book Award. It was also Barnes & Noble Discovery Prize, Best Fiction Debut of 2019, BBC Radio 2 Book Club, Radio 4 Book at Bedtime, and was named a Book of the Year by the Evening Standard in the Times as well. So Claire, will you please introduce us to the world of Golden Child and just give us a lovely little morsel of a reading?
Sure, thank you so much. And it's so great to be here. And this is, like we were saying just before, as we're sort of warming up and getting our technology ready, like this is almost more exciting than being at a real live event. So it's so great that you guys are here to join us, and thank you so much to the Society of Authors for organizing this for us. So I'm the author of Golden Child. This is the old cover, the one that you may have may sort of look a little bit different. So Golden Child, so it's set in Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island in the Caribbean, which is where I grew up. And it's the story of a family. It's a sort of, a bog standard family, mom, dad, and 2 twin boys. And the boys are age 13 when the novel opens. And the 2 boys are very different. One is very clever, and one is has some sort of difficulties which aren't very well understood. And yes, the family has been saving for a long time for the very brilliant boy to go away to university in America, where his life will be different and better. And then trouble strikes when one of the boys goes missing, and everything sort of begins to go a bit wrong for them. So yes, that's it. I've done this intro so many times. I really should be able to give you like a really gripping sort of, I'm always going to be like, well, yeah, it's kind of about this family. So I'm looking forward to hearing the other ones as well. Okay, so I'm just going to read a really short paragraph for you. So this is So the father of the story is called Clyde, and in this short scene, he's visiting his brother-in-law, Romesh. And he's sort of been out looking for the missing child for a couple of hours, and he's ended up in Romesh's house, and so they're having a little talk about it. Clyde slides a cigarette out, places it between his lips, and lights it with a match. Teenagers, he says, tossing the match into the ashtray. This boy has taken years off my life, I swear to God. He had better be in the nightclub, let me tell you. He'd better not be getting up to any kind of mischief. He rubs his fingers along the lines of the corduroy fabric of the sofa, runs his nails along the grooves. Henna, he said, I wanted to ask you something. Who has the contract for your security system? He mentions the name of a man in Arima who has been trying to sell him a security system since the break-in. He says he'll give me a good discount, but I don't know who he is. Whoever comes to put in security system, they have access to every room in your house, not so? They say they're laying wires, but while they do it, they make sure to go around the whole place, looking to see where the drawers are, where the cupboards are. They look under the mattresses, everything. Romesh runs his hands through his hair and looks at his palms and wipes them on his shorts. Something wrong? Clyde asks. I find it hot. You don't find it hot? I'll stop there. It's just a paragraph.
Brilliant. And that was The Fabulous Golden Child, which I sent Claire an email last night. I discovered this book on my own. I was dying to read it. I was stuck on a cruise ship without my family for 2 days on my anniversary. And the only thing that kept me from jumping overboard was sitting in a lounger with this book for 2 days, devouring it. So it's brilliant. Next up is the wonderful Sara Collins, and I'm going to hold up an ancient edition of Confessions of Frannie Langton, the proof stage. Somewhere in this stack, I think around here is the hardcover, but I've had and treasured this since long before its publication. Sara studied law at the London School of Economics before qualifying as a barrister in 1994. She worked as a lawyer for 17 years before obtaining a master's degree in creative writing with distinction from Cambridge University in 2016, where she won the Michael Holyrood Prize. And prior to publication, The Confessions of Frannie Langton was shortlisted for the Lucy Cavendish Prize and was published earlier this year by Penguin in the UK and HarperCollins in the US to critical acclaim. It has been sold for translation into more than 14 languages, as well as being optioned for TV, and it has made appearances on many, many best-of lists: Oprah Magazine, The Guardian, The Observer, Amazon, Apple, Essence, to name a few. Oprah Magazine named her one of the women of the summer of 2019, and Sunday Times called her a star in the making. The Confessions of Frannie Langton is the winner of the 2019 Cost the First Novel Award, and it's also been shortlisted for the OCM Wilkes Literature Prize and the McKitterick Prize, the British Book Award. So, Sara, take it away.
Hello. Thank you so much, Kelleigh. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, all of you fabulous women. Not least because we've reminded ourselves that we can still do absolutely brilliant things after 40, which, you know, I keep pinching myself about. My book, the new hardcover.
There it is.
Frannie Langton. And it is about a young Jamaican woman who is brought to London in the early 19th century from the plantation in Jamaica where she grows up. And she is given as a gift to a natural philosopher, George Benham, to work as a maid in his Mayfair mansion. And while there, she develops an instant attraction bordering on obsession with her mistress, Benham's wife, who is an enigmatic and perpetually dissatisfied Frenchwoman. So who wouldn't be attracted to her? And the pair embark on this very twisted love affair, which ends in tragedy because Benham and his wife are found murdered. They're found stabbed to death in their house. We know this at the beginning of the novel because suspicion has fallen on Frannie and she has been charged with their murders. So the novel opens with her being put on trial at the Old Bailey. And her barrister says, basically, give me something that I can save your neck with. And that takes the form of her confession, which is her life story, which we soon realize is an attempt to convince herself as much as the reader that she couldn't have done this terrible thing that she's accused of, because she never would have murdered the only woman she ever loved. And it's a Gothic romance. It's my tribute to the great Gothic romances I fell in love with as a young reader, including Jane Eyre. And so I made sure to include a mad wife practically imprisoned in the attic of this great house. But as I like to describe it on the road, it's Jane Eyre if Jane had shagged the mad woman in the attic and then been accused of killing Mr. Rochester, which is a fate Mr. Rochester deserved. I'm just going to read from the very opening of the novel. Frannie's being brought into the Old Bailey. It's 1826, London. My trial starts the way my life did, a squall of elbows and shoving and spit. From the prisoner's hold, they take me through the gallery, down the stairs, and past the table crawling with barristers and clerks. Around me, a river of faces in flood, their mutters rising, blending with the lawyer's whispers, a noise that hums with all the spite of bees in a bush. Heads turn as I enter, every eye a skewer. I duck my head, peer at my boots, grip my hands to stop their awful trembling. It seems all of London is here, but then murder is the story this city likes best. All of them swollen into the same mood, all of them in a stir about the sensation excited by these most ferocious murders. Those were the words of the Morning Chronicle, itself in the business of harvesting that very sensation like an ink black crop. I don't make a habit of reading what the broadsheets say about me. For newspapers are like a mirror I saw once in a fair near the Strand that stretched my reflection like a rack, gave me two heads, so I almost didn't know myself. If you've ever had the misfortune to be written about, you know what I mean. And that's Frannie.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sara. And last but certainly not least, we have Regina Porter, whose novel is called The Travelers, and it's absolutely extraordinary. Regina is a graduate of the MFA program at the wonderful Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was an Iowa Arts Fellow and a Ray Armour West postgraduate scholar. Her writing has been published in the Harvard Review, Tin House, and the Oxford Review. She's also an award-winning playwright. Regina's debut novel, The Travelers, was nominated for the Edinburgh International Book Festival's First Book Award. Francis Prix Medicis, my husband who speaks French is shaking his head, for foreign literature, and Grand Prize for American Literature. It was a Barnes & Noble Discovering Notable Fiction title. It was longlisted for the 2020 Orwell Political Fiction Prize, and it was a runner-up in the 2020 Penn Hemingway Award for a debut novel. And Regina, please introduce us to The Travelers and give us a taste.
Okay, so my novel, The Travelers, it takes place from the 1950s to Obama's first year as president, and it tracks the lives of two American families. The patriarch, the man James, is Irish American, and the matriarch from a different family is African American, and her name is Agnes Miller. Their lives intersect through the marriage of their children, who are both academics. And so the novel basically follows their love lives, their families, the tragedies in their lives with a historical backdrop. I'm going to read a section I have not read aloud before, but I think given the world right now, it will resonate. Please bear with me, my vision is not so great. And it is from the point of view of Agnes's husband, whom she marries, Eddie Christos, after a tragedy on a dark Georgia road. He is a sailor in the Navy during the Vietnam War, and he is on a naval ship. If Reuben had been on the USS Olympus with Jeb and me, things might have turned out different. Jeb and Reuben and Levi, Reuben's little brother, they all grew up in the same house. Reuben and Levi's father was Jeb's uncle, and my mom was their first cousin. During the summers, she'd send me down south to know my people. And we'd stay with Reuben and Levi and play baseball and get up into all kinds of foolishness. Reuben was the oldest, so even back then, he was the sergeant, tagged with not letting us get into trouble. He was the oldest by 2 years, and with it being the South, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. Growing up in the Bronx, I had neighbors who were from Italy and Greece, and Jewish neighbors, and I wasn't so stuck in the black and white of things. But when I went south, my mama, she always gave me this lecture about Emmett Till. Everything was shorthand for Emmett Till. I don't want to have to come down and look at your face in a coffin, you hear? And when I got down there, we would talk about it, you know? We would laugh, not at Emmett, but how half the things you couldn't do had no rhyme or reason to them, like swim with kids in a pool full of chlorine. We laugh because when you come from somewhere else and see colored that and white this, it doesn't make sense. And you see how ridiculous the half-hearted pieces of the whole thing is. I'll stop there.
Thank you. They're all so amazing. Okay, let's get into questions. So how I want to start is one of the reasons that the McKitterick Prize is so important to me personally is I think there's so much focus and hype placed around debuts of authors in their 20s and the hot new debut. And I think what's extraordinary is there are so many amazing novelists whose books are being rewarded, who come to their first novel a little later in life. And I think what is so important is that debut authors over 40 bring a whole wealth of experience that really does alter the debut that they wrote. So my question to you is, can you each speak a bit about your personal journeys before publication and how that impacted your book? Basically, in a nutshell, is your debut written as a novelist over 40 the same book you might have written as a novelist in your 20s or early 30s? Or do you think that added life experience has had an impact? Claire, let's start with you.
Sure, yes. I think it's a great question. And I mean, for me, like, would it have been a different book if it was younger? I mean, I don't think I could have sort of produced a book at all earlier than this. I mean, this is like I've been working on writing for a long time. I've been wanting to write for a long time. And like, this was the fastest I could get it out, you know? Yes, I mean, I'm one of those people who sort of always carried notebooks around, and like, you know, I think it's just a question of when opportunity kind of lines up for you. Like, you know, when I was in my 20s after college, like I had, you know, I was kind of drifting, you know, I was in Italy kind of teaching English. I had plenty of time. I had so much time I didn't know what to do with myself, you know, and I did write. I filled notebooks, but I knew that they were all kind of rubbish. So it was only, for me, actually, it was only after I had my kids, I sort of got this, like, you know, for whom the bell tolls moment. I was like, oh my God, time is running out. And that was sort of when I was just like, you know, and I worked like a total demon, and it's, you know, this is how long it took me. But like, you know, so this novel is set in Trinidad, and like one of my things was like, I tried really hard not to write about Trinidad. And so I wrote a couple of other books which were set in all kind of exotic places. Russia, England, New Zealand, you know, all kind of places. And then it was, you know, none of them were working. And, you know, I was sort of still worried. It was like, oh my God, why isn't this working? And then I was like, and it was when I was doing my MA, and somebody was like, well, why aren't you writing about Trinidad? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, why don't you try? And I tried. And it was like, you know, straight away I could sort of see there was a difference. And we can talk a little bit more about, you know, if other people had experiences like that. But so that was kind of why it took me so long. And I mean,
Brilliant.
like with regard to Trinidad, so with regard to Trinidad, the only thing is, like, it is quite helpful to have distance. If I had continued to write well in Trinidad, that would have been a different book to writing from a distance.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that in a moment. But for now, Regina, can you answer the same questions?
Well, yes, I started out as a playwright, and so even when I was writing plays, it was always interesting. I love Toni Morrison. I would always say that I would like to have my plays work like novels. And so I think for years, I wanted to write a novel and I was intimidated. And then eventually I wrote a very bad novel, trying to follow, I think, all of the rules of writing a novel. But do you know, I think like Claire, I had children, things fell into place. And I also made peace in some ways with my inability to understand history and my relationship to language and history, especially coming from the South where there's so much history around us. And so I don't think I could not have written this book with the empathy for the characters that I have now at 20. You know, when you're 20, you are the center of the world. When you're 40, you understand that you are a part of this world, and this world does things to you, your ancestors, and your children. So, yes.
And that's great. I also think one of the most exciting things about your novel is that it doesn't follow the rules. So we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yes.
Sarah?
So like Karen, Regina, I also have children. I have 5 children. Some of whom I acquired by marriage and all of whom I love dearly. But I think anyone with children can relate to this. The really important role they played in the story of getting my novel written was to start growing up and moving the hell out of my house. I think there are some practical implications. I always wanted to write a novel. I don't have a conscious memory of myself, little, young adult, or otherwise, when that wasn't my strongest yearning. But I took a number of diversions. I raised those 5 children, but I was also a lawyer for 17 years, as my bio alluded to. And they were miserable years because I knew I had taken a wrong turn or settled for second best. But the thing about novel writing is that no one tells you, there's no roadmap for how it's going to pay the bills. And so the reality is that many people have to do different things first, which is one of the really important reasons for celebrating debuts over 40. You know, we had to, one of the things that being a lawyer, miserable as I was, did for me was that it bought me some time to write the novel. And one of the things waiting for my kids to grow up did for me was that it bought me some time to write the novel, because I found it a really selfish process. It demands a degree of selfishness. It demands a degree of putting the work before other things, becoming immersed in the work, or at least that's how it was for me, becoming obsessive. I read once that Alice Munro said somewhere that she wrote short stories because she had small children and no washing machine. And that with me. She had little snippets of time, and all she had time for was short stories. And when I wanted to write a novel and wanted to create and carve out that time to write a novel, I realized that I had to devote every bit of my energy and almost every kind of minute of my life in service of that project. And it's something I just would never have been able to do in my 20s or 30s. I think the other thing is the stuff that I have grappled with it's not the novel I thought I was going to write. All along, I thought I was going to write something very thrilling, some kind of psychological thriller. But just like you, Regina, I love Toni Morrison. I think she was one of the writers that turned on the writing switch for me. And it's interesting to me that the novel I did write when I sat down at 40-something to write it is much more of an homage to her than the thing I thought I had in mind.
So exciting. And we'll hear more about your inspiration from the Gothic and other influences in a minute. I now want to turn to each of your individual novels. Claire, I'd like to start with Golden Child. There's such a strong sense of place in this novel. I told my husband, it's so vividly described Trinidad. It almost functions as another protagonist. It's like a character in the novel. How important was it to you to set this novel in Trinidad? You spoke a bit about this a moment ago, but did you think about setting this story anywhere else? And if you had, would it have been different? And what was it like writing from memory, since you haven't lived there in a very long time?
Yeah, absolutely. They're great questions. Thank you. So yes, I mean, with regard to Trinidad, as I said before, like I spent a long time sort of trying really hard to avoid Trinidad because so I lived there until I was 18 and then I left. And in fact, all my childhood, I was like, I want to go to the big wide world. I want to get out. And so it just seemed sort of counterintuitive to return there. And I mean, also there's the fact that like I haven't lived there myself in 20 years. It was a bit like, oh, am I up to date? Like, how will that, I don't know, just will I get it right or things sort of along that line. But actually it was, you know, when I turned to writing about Trinidad, it really was a sort of a breakthrough for me. And like what I realize is it's very important to know, you know, they say write what you know, but like I think what was important for me or what helped me was to just know the physical world. So it's like, what exactly is it like to live in a house like this? What is it like? You know, at the beginning of the story, there's no water, and you know, so they turn on the tap, no water coming out. And so like, what is it like when you, there's all sorts of things that you suddenly can't do. So it's just those sort of actually very sort of subtle realities of life that made it possible for me to see the story clearly. But I guess the other thing is that like, so like with regards to whether it could have been set anywhere, I mean, I think yes, it's a place that I know, and so it made it possible for me to tell the story. But like really, it's a story of, you know, the story of this sort of yearning to go to a place with more possibility. That's all the story really is. And so in a sense, that story has been told a million times by other people. You know, you think of anybody in a small town in America and they're fed up of their life and, you know, they hate their parents and they want to go, you know, but the thing is, like in a huge landmass like America or Europe or Australia, if you want to change your life, you get in your car and you drive, you know, 500 miles and you start all over, you know, whereas like it just increases the pressure on the characters if you put them on this island where like for them now they have to try and get off the island, you know, so it sort of increases the dramatic possibility in that case. And then the other thing was that, you know, in Trinidad, like we do happen to have all this sort of crime and corruption, you know, right now. And so that kind of, like when I started out, I thought, okay, you know, this, I can put up plenty drama in this situation, you know, that's kind of what I thought. Like, but you know, it's quite a few readers to sort of ask me, oh, did you amp up the crime? I was like, no, not at all. I was like raiding back in that crime. I thought I was really, really restrained. But so yes, I think what sort of, you know, they're the right sort of mix of factors for Trinidad. They are the real mix of factors. But I mean, in fact, it could have, you know, such a story might have been written in a totally different place as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Regina, so I'd like to ask you, as I was reading The Travelers, I was fascinated because we really, you give us this unique chorus of voices and perspectives, and the reader gets to experience these significant social and historical American 20th century milestones through these highly personal lenses, these shifting lenses. And it focuses on an Irish Caucasian family, an African American family who, with a third generation marriage, ultimately dovetail. Did you know when you started writing it that those two families would connect? Was it always about two families, two tribes, or did you start with a much more narrow focus and zoom out? How was that created?
The first story was the one, Pass It On, that I would later realize connected everything. I did not realize that at the time that I wrote it. That's the patriarch's story, the man James and his family, but it basically introduces Claudia. It sets up that other characters, or we're going to learn about aspects of their lives. Then the second chapter was Agnes's story. And so in retrospect, I was able to see that there was an architecture there. Sometimes we are not always aware of the architecture of the work when we're writing it. For me, I think the unknown is very important. I learned that from my first attempt at a novel. And then but by the time I got to the end, I could look back and see how all of the pieces connected. But there would literally be moments where I would realize, oh my God, Hank is Rufus's brother. Of course, Hank is Rufus's brother. How did I not realize that? How did I not realize that? But if I had realized that before, I might have written toward it in a cliched way. And so the discovery was more organic for me. Yes.
That is fascinating. Yeah. Every page I was wondering that, and that's so interesting. And I think there is something to that element of surprising yourself as you go. Yes. That's so important. Sara, our books started their journeys together in the Lucy Cavendish Prize, so I've been a bit privy to your process. So forgive me if I slide in some insider information. I know from living the history of this novel with you that you were very much inspired by your love, as you mentioned, of 19th century Gothic fiction, and especially Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, and that you set out to create a new kind of Gothic heroine and to allow the reader to discover this genre from the perspective of a woman of color. And can you tell us a bit about your influences, but also what it was like to take a genre that has been so important to you, shake it up, redefine it? And also, did you see this more as an homage or an act of rebellion?
But in a way, the Gothic always is a kind of act of rebellion, although it became very prescriptive after a while. I mean, I think my very first motive was that I was so fed up with looking to history and historical fiction for Black characters and Black protagonists and seeing them only in one role. This idea that when Black characters appear in historical fiction, they are trapped in a kind of perpetual victimhood. And also this idea that, if you're a Black woman writing in a historical novel in the 21st century, then it's sort of universally expected that you're going to be writing about slavery. And I had this sense, and I think a lot of Black writers and readers have this sense, that if we're not careful, we will reduce that expectation and the novel to a kind of cliche. So I wanted to see if I could do something different with that. It was really important to me for my historical novel to be an adventure and for my protagonist to be someone who was educated, highly educated, the smartest person in every room, and she knows it. She's very arrogant, she's very sure of herself, but she is being held back by the realities of her existence. And how would that feel? I'm actually surprised that no one has explored it before, because it was such interesting, fertile material for a novel. I wanted her to be passionate, and I wanted her to be in love. Where are the love stories, the historical love stories featuring Black protagonists? And it seemed to me that the Gothic was the perfect vehicle for combining this. This idea that, I'm putting a Jamaican woman into Jane Austen territory. And what I want to do by doing that, is to dig away at the underbelly. So this layer of civilization and sophistication is really hiding this underbelly. The fact that all of this is propped up on slavery and addiction and sin, but to do it in a way that subverts expectations. So I just, as one example, I had these three marvelous editors, but any time we talked about the book, which is divided into sections, Plantation and London, they would always say, well, we need more Plantation, and we need to understand what her life was like as a child and what leads her to make the decisions she made. And my mantra in response to that was less Plantation. What I want is more life. I want more of the kind of vibrancy. And I would only do it, I would only sort of accede to their suggestions if I could subvert expectations. So I made a rule that there would be no stereotypical scenes of suffering. For example, the only people who are whipped in this novel are white men. And they're whipped because they flock to the brothel where Frannie ends up working in London, the spanking parlor, begging for it. And she's the one doing the whipping. And that was my kind of, you talk about rebellion. I think the novel is a wonderful form for turning even its own expectations on its head. So what do we expect from a protagonist like Frannie in 1826? well, why not use the form to offer up something completely different?
That's brilliant. Just to move on from that a tiny bit, what you were saying about subverting stereotypes, I thought it was very interesting that in their very different ways, all three novels deal with class, with race, but most importantly with opportunity. I thought that was a common theme that all three novels have, an opportunity for transformation, for advancement, for education, for power, for expression. I thought there was this common theme of opportunity that was very closely linked, of course, to race and to class. And I'd love to hear you all talk a bit about that. Claire, would you like to start?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I think it was interesting hearing what Regina was saying, that, you know, sometimes it's good to maybe not pin down exactly what it is you need to be sort of reaching towards something. If you sort of know everything at the outset, then it kind of, you know, you write it and you're like, this looks so flat and I don't know why. So I think for me, that is one thing I was sort of trying to work out in my mind. I was like, you know, I'm from a family of four, and I grew up in Trinidad in the 80s. And, we had some economic problems at the time. A lot of people were leaving, but there was still this kind of drive. I was like, people are like, it's not necessarily like this now. So don't think, oh my God, Trinidad is a place everybody's dying to leave. It's not necessarily like, I'm just talking about a particular time and place. I was like, what is it? What is making everybody sort of make these huge sacrifices to get to the US or get to Canada or get to England or whatever it is. So I think that, an opportunity, I would sort of talk to people, people sort of, in my masters or in editors or whatever. And, people sort of think, they're leaving to try and get to a better life, or they're leaving for opportunity. And I think it's, like when you say it like that, it sort of sounds, it's like something it's a word, it's a little phrase, but it really was not that clear to me what exactly it was. I mean, this is a huge, and in the characters in this book, there's this, like if you read the book, there's this character Clyde who's at the center of it. This Clyde has this, he is like steel. This man is like made of steel. And it's like, what is that? What puts that into somebody? And so this isn't a very direct answer to your question, only to say that, like, what from a distance sort of seems like, a reaching towards opportunity. For me, as I was writing, it was not that clear cut at all. It was, it still isn't that easy to explain what it is. I think it's best explained in the novel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Perfect. Regina, the same question.
I think I would piggyback a little on what Claire said. I will say this, that, and I had not thought about it before, during one of the post-reading discussions, while I was on tour, a reader said, you took such time to give your characters jobs. And I want to acknowledge what Claire with both novels. I thought the world building was astonishing, and I thought Clyde and the work and this notion of an honest job, sometimes for not honest pay. And this is what I mean about the being older in a regard for history and how hard people worked and how they made a way out of no way. When you're young, you're quite often arrogant and you're not always able to perceive the intelligence, and then to acknowledge Sara, the subversiveness that is necessary to survive. And so for me, in both families, both Agnes Miller's family and the man James's family, we see the importance of education as a form of upward mobility, the importance of stable jobs for families, the importance of being able to live in a safe neighborhood. And what happens to, let's just move this from what happens to interpersonal relationships when history is sort of pressed upon people, when racism is sort of pressed upon people. At the same time, you want to be able to depict the joy and the love in your characters' lives. And again, a nod to Sara. And so for me, as I'm writing about the characters, and they always come first, there are moments where I stop and I think, oh my goodness, there's not a love story here. This is a way I might fall into stereotypes. Let me stop, because I think Ellison said once in writing The Invisible Man, he regretted not taking more time for the female characters. You have to be very careful, even when you're a writer of color, not to fall into the stereotypes of victimizing your characters, and to show the love and the joy even as they work. And so these things, I could not have articulated this when I was 20 in quite this way. And their relationship to what is happening now. So
brilliant. Sara?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think also about what you said a moment ago about the work taking you in directions that almost the work is demanding autonomously. It's a kind of subconscious engagement with it. And part of that for me with this novel, the little bit of autobiography it unlocked, was exactly this idea. You know, I grew up in a small island. I relate so well to that feeling of wanting to travel, wanting to be somewhere different, be someone different, but being kind of trapped behind the barriers of the Caribbean, that the Caribbean Sea has formed around your hometown. And the fact that small islands are supposed to breed small ambitions, that, you know, I really had that sense as a young Black girl in the Caribbean, that there was some inequality on the world stage, which meant, you know, the material of my life was not the important stuff of the world, that we were all paying attention to other things. And what's wonderful to me about books is how democratizing they are, how, you know, your gaze, I think, if you are from a class that is considered inferior or a race that is considered inferior, is always pulled outwards. You're always being demanded to look outside of yourself for beauty, for intelligence, for ideas of love, for ideas of history. But with a novel, with the kind of close perspective of a novel, people from those backgrounds can claim their territory. That's what I find so wonderful and so empowering about it. And so, you know, the novel transcends race and class in that way. And just like Claire and Regina, I think part of how that came to me, and, you know, the sort of way it worked into my novel thematically, was purely subconscious, but based on my own experience of the world.
As all good themes are. And I do think it's another common element that they all have, is very much based on education and art and your influences. I think it's fascinating that whether it's references to literature or poetry or Shakespeare or Stoppard, they're just packed with your own influences that have found their way organically into your fiction. And I wanted to ask you about that, but we need to get to Q&A. But I want to ask you one last thing, and hopefully there'll be no Q&A questions, and I can just keep asking you my questions. No, I'm kidding. But one last question before I turn to our lovely viewers, listeners. I wanted to ask you, what has creativity during this very odd period been like for the three of you, during our new normal, with both the quarantine and COVID-19 and seismic societal changes? And what has it been like to create, to write? Has it had an impact on what you're writing? Have you suffered writer's block? Have you had wild bursts of creativity? What has this extraordinary period meant for you as an artist? Regina, can we start with you?
Well, living here in America right now, it's a very intense time, and for me, I think I'm processing, I'm listening. In terms of craft and daily writing, I communicate with my fellow writers, and I would say if I get in an hour of writing, an hour and a half, that's a very good day. I think my ability to focus is kind of dissipated. So I write in little spurts, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm able to sort of stop, and a lot is happening in the country. I read that piece, that section, the excerpt, for a reason, to show that one of the questions writers are grappling with is, well, how will your work change as a result? Well, what I read is in conversation with now. A lot of what's happening isn't new. It's a continuation of conversations we never really had. And so I don't think my writing itself will change. Maybe perhaps the intimacy with how I approach what I write will change, how I build or collapse language.
Brilliant. Claire?
So for me, can you still hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, in some respects, and a lot of people were sort of saying this at the beginning when we all sort of got sent into lockdown. In some respects, lockdown presents the perfect opportunity, right? But I mean,
but with it comes pressure. Yes, we all think we need to come out of it with war and peace.
I know. So I think like others, I think I've just tried to, whatever you get done, you kind of give yourself a big pat on the back. You're like, I did it. I did something today. And some days are better than others, and like you can't expect every day to be I wrote 10,000 words today. I mean, sometimes it does not happen. No. Yeah, and I kind of have gone in patches. Like I've had like productive patches, and then other patches where I just lose a few days to news and just like, oh my God, the world is gonna end. Yeah. But like one thing I feel, which is that, as authors, like we have to protect, we have to be selfish. Like there's an argument for saying we have to give ourselves permission to write. We have to be selfish. There have to be times when we close the door, we say, nobody is coming in. I am writing my book. So, I kind of say that to myself, because the thing is, like all of this stuff, here we are talking about books, there's prizes, there's bookshops, there's this huge industry. Like we don't sit here thinking, I don't sit here thinking about money, and I don't know to what extent you guys do, but like this whole industry needs books, so in whatever way, that is one way at the very least that we can be useful to society, is like I'm the only person who can write the book I'm working on. Sara, you're the only one. Regina, Kelleigh, you're the only. So like you have to do it. If this doesn't do it, the whole thing is going to come crumbling down. So that's kind of how I feel.
So true. Brilliant. Sara?
I think there's a point there, because at some point I reminded myself that writing is work, that it's a job, that it takes a certain kind of discipline and a professional kind of dedication to it. Because, for the first couple of weeks, I was really crippled by anxiety. There was a lot going on. It's impossible to work productively at anything when you're worried about the health of your loved ones and people's loved ones. And so it was important, I think, to be forgiving, to realize that we were all going through something pretty seismic. And so we weren't going to be able to work as productively as we might otherwise have been. A strange thing happened to me. I was on deadline for a short story. It was a love story. It had been commissioned for an anthology of love stories written by writers of color about protagonists of color. So a subject very dear to my heart, because those are in such short supply. And I had my two characters, and it was going to be an incredibly sort of passionate love story. I could not get them to do anything. I went to the laptop day after day, and this story was just static. And I realized my characters were in stasis, because and so was everyone else. How do you write when the things that are usually giving you writing energy, even just observing people? I'm a huge people watcher. Just seeing how people behave in public will give me an idea, or going for a walk will unlock some block. And I didn't have all of that. And so I had to find a way to work through it. And I've always said, I don't know if you guys get this question, but I get this question a lot about how do you work through writer's block? And I always have a very self-satisfied and, sort of self-righteous answer, which is, I'm a professional writer. We don't get writer's block. And I quote, the great rapper, poet Rakim, who said, writer's block is just the block I write on. And I keep on telling myself, if you're a writer, then you have to write in response to anything, no matter what it is. Police brutality, and Regina, that sort of wonderful passage that you read, which is communication from then to now. Pandemics, all of this sort of great literature about the 1918 flu, world wars, slavery, whatever it is, writers have written through and in response to it. And so I had to kind of remind myself about both that sort of historical link to all of the people who have gone before us, and also writers' professional obligation, compulsion almost, in order to get through those first few weeks. But the first few weeks produced nothing, and it was just a feeling of complete, sheer, overwhelming panic. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm not sure what contemporary fiction is now either, because, there's a post-pandemic world that's no longer contemporary. It's all historical now, and we don't quite know what the new world will look like.
Yeah. It's I started when it first happened. I thought we can only write about plagues. I ordered my stack of influenza plague of 1918 books, and then by the time they arrived, I thought, no, by the time this book is published, this will be ancient history. So, and
we don't have any perspective on it. I think about distance. We don't really have the right distance from the current crisis either.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So we ourselves are in a state of limbo, aren't we?
Well, thank you, all three of you, for that answer. I personally feel less alone and inspired, and will be kinder to myself, and I'm sure a lot of others will too. So moving over to the Q&A, I apologize to everyone. I'm running a bit over because we started late due to technical difficulties. This is a perfect segue from what we've been talking about. Just the first one that I look over and see. The fantastic Andrew Willey has written, you've all had incredible successes with your debuts. Are you writing second novels? If so, what lessons from writing novel one are you bringing to your second book? Anyone jump in?
Yeah. I'm writing a second novel. It's very hard to sort of sum up what the lessons are, but I've learned a lot. I really have learned a lot. And I feel like I should write my, lesson. I would love to, I feel like I must share what I have learned, but I don't really know how to do that.
And then I guess, I'm writing a second novel, but I almost feel the opposite. I feel as if I cannot remember what I learned. I feel just bewildered and fresh and new and innocent of the whole thing as I did before, and therefore just as anxious. Which I hope is a good thing, because there's a kind of writing adrenaline that fuels the writing muscle. And that, for my first one, it was sheer terror. It was the idea that I didn't really know what I was doing and that it was all a bit beyond me. So while I, wrestle with that same overwhelming sense of difficulty again, I hope it's going to kind of spur me to relearn the lessons. And I hope some of them were buried subconsciously. But I think it's important for people tackling their second novel to know that it could also feel just as intimidating, at least it does for me, and just as much like you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah. I agree. I was actually, before the pandemic, working on a novel, and then during it, I couldn't write for the first few weeks. And then suddenly this new novel started writing me, and that's the only way I can say it, because I feel like that's what I mean by spurts. There are just periods where I sit down and I'm like, what the hell? And it's happening that way for a reason. And there's a certain amount of surrender that I have to just accept, and we'll see. We'll see.
Brilliant. Yeah. Allie Thurm asks, Sara talked a bit about her influences being Bronte and Toni Morrison. Could each of you give us a few of your influences, writers who inspire you?
Kelleigh, you want to go?
Yeah, so writers, and so I read a lot of Coetzee when I was writing Golden Child. So that was the book called Disgrace. I read a lot of, I mean, so I did physics as my undergraduate degree. So I have a lot of writing, a lot of reading to catch up on. So I have this Excel spreadsheet and I have them organized by period and, you know, where the writers come from. And I'm working my way through. So that's kind of where I am. But like other content, I love, so I love Yiyun Lee, who is a Chinese-American writer, and she just did a sort of a read-along of War and Peace over pandemic, which like saved my life. So that was fantastic. And I mean, I'm starting at I'm on like Thomas Hardy, Shakespeare. I have to go back to the beginning. So that's me. Yeah.
Sara, do you want to add to that?
Regina, were you saying something, Regina?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that's a tough question because it changes sometimes so much depending on who you are at certain points in your life. But I love Toni Morrison. I love Alice Munro. I think someone else mentioned her. She's great for flash forwards, like these huge leaps in time. And then I think I learned a great deal from her. There's a wonderful writer, African-American writer named Ann Petrie, and I think her short stories are often, they're just these gems in conversation with Alice Munro. I think she's just as fine of a writer. Graham Greene, you know, Sebald, whose use of photographs clearly influenced the travelers, except for me, again, the whole idea of like history sometimes happening to the characters as they move through it, as opposed to with Sebald, I think there's retrospection and trying to make sense of the history. But so many influences, and Faulkner and Morrison, those two, like they're definitely in conversation. So a lot of different, Edward P. Jones, James Allen McPherson, Zora Neale Hurston, and I think I see elements of Hurston in both Claire and Sarah's work in terms of just sort of, I think the voice, the ability to claim language. Yeah.
Sara, do you want to add any others?
I love that. I actually wanted to make notes as you were talking because that's a wonderful kind of reading list right there. I think part of the challenge for me now is how not to be influenced, because I find myself reading forensically now, which I didn't realize that writing a novel would do this to me, but it has impacted my enjoyment of novels. It takes a really good novel now for me to find myself immersed. Usually I'm reading as a technician and I'm trying to take it apart and I'm dissecting it. My very early influences, as I said, were the Gothic novels. So I read and reread Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre once a year during my teens. But I also loved Jane Austen, those sort of novels of manners, her dialogue, her kind of observations of human nature, the humor, and then sort of more contemporary. So when I was figuring out my notions of myself as a woman, in particular as a Black woman, there was Alice Walker, there was Toni Morrison, there was Zora Neale Hurston. There was that idea that it wasn't just their work, but the way they talked about their work and the way they lived. That idea that you could be accepted as universally excellent on your own terms. That's been, just their existence in the world was a huge influence on me. And then more recently, for what I'm trying to do, this kind of modern distillation of the Gothic, I love Sarah Waters and I love Sarah Perry. It's that you have to be named Sarah or Sara to be a really good novel.
I am going to thank you. I love all of those, and I was making mental notes, and the only reason I didn't write them down is I lack a pen. I'm going to sort of combine two questions by Kelly Jackson and Michelle Garrett, smushed together. What is next for you, and will you in your next works continue to explore the same themes, or do you feel that you want to move in a wholly new direction, stylistically or thematically? Claire, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So, are we going to go for like different things? I mean, I think the themes choose themselves. That's my approach anyway. I think if you kind of go, I mean, with Golden Child, people were like, "Wow, it's about masculinity," and I was like, "Really?" I was the last to know, So I think that's a
Yeah,
that's a good
exactly.
place to be in. If you set out, you're just gonna fall flat. So, but like having said that, then I was like, "Oh my God, that novel was about masculinity," and there are like all these men in this novel, and somebody was like, "Oh, there are all these men." So anyway, so now I'm gonna try and like steer to the other. I'm gonna try and write about a woman. So that's all I can. That's the only thing the only sort of conscious direction I'm sort of trying to shift. I don't know. That's all I can say about what I'm trying to do next.
Perfect. Regina?
I'm just going to take it a day at a time and see where the characters take me. That won't change, because ultimately for me it's about the characters. So let's see what happens.
Brilliant. Yeah. Sarah?
I had an experience very similar to Regina's, which is that I was writing one thing and I've been pulled in another direction by a completely different thing. And I think the reason is because I spoke about the one thing. So my second novel, I made the mistake of any time I was asked, I sort of even outlined the plot. It was going to be about a suicide cult of these two kids who grew up in this cult, and they fell in love, and it was very Wuthering Heights. And I talked it to death. When I started writing it, it just felt flat, and it was flattening itself. And I realized it was because I had talked it to death. While I was doing that, another idea, a yellow wallpaper inspired thing, pulled me in a complete.
Oh, I love that.
And writing is so miserable that you should really be writing something that engages you or that fires you up in some way. So I've just decided to give myself permission to do that as well, and also not to talk it out too much, because I feel the energy has to be inward rather than the project you're working on.
Yes, I'm just going to say something because I'm just scrolling through these questions and I see there are quite a lot of writers there. So just as sort of another opinion on that, I agree with you about like not talking about it too much. I feel like I have to sort of protect the space that it's in. But then then suddenly I'm like, I'm ready to talk, and then I sort of might talk. And they're like, "Oh, that sounds very interesting," and you're like, "Oh shoot!" So I've done that a couple of times, but it's not only how they respond; it's also for me, as I've sort of heard myself saying the words, I'm like, "Oh, fake." So so just to offer the writers out there, a balance of protecting your thoughts and testing them against others, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a degree to which the magic in the book comes when you're writing it and after you've written it. So after you've written the book, you can talk about it with that sort of electric charge to it. That while you're putting your way into it, people can tell that you're tentative because it's so. And so the whole thing wraps itself up after your subconscious has gone to work on it, not before.
Perfect. One, because there are so many writers. Just a practical question. Betty Rose wants to know, did you journey to publication? Did you each query an agent? What was the process of obtaining representation? Just to talk shop for a moment, because I think people always find that helpful.
Yeah, I feel like a fraud on that question, because as you know, Kelleigh, I didn't query because we were shortlisted for the Lucy Cavendish Prize together. And my agent was one of the judges that year and essentially offered me representation before the novel had even been finished. So I always feel like a complete fraud. Like I haven't had the right trial by fire.
Nothing fraud about it. If I may jump in for a minute and say, whenever anyone asks me this question, there are the most extraordinary competitions for writers pre-publication. Lucy Cavendish Prize is one. The Bridport Prize is one. That is how I as well got my agent for Swan Song. Bath Novel Award. The Women's Prize is about to launch a discovery initiative, which is so exciting.
Yeah.
My God. So that is really, in my view, it's the best way. It's egalitarian. They're often judged blindly. It's just about the words on the page, and agents pay attention to those prizes. It's a way to get read, and they're amazing. I'd love to hear from Regina and Claire as well.
You don't even have to have a complete novel for some of them.
No, that's right. For some of them, it's
a huge advantage.
It's just, for the first round, it may be a chapter. So everyone do check that out, because it really is, I think, the most amazing way to get great work noticed if you don't know anyone in the industry. So, but Claire, Regina, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah. Regina?
Oh, sure. What happened with me was I was in the process of writing my novel, and one of my professors, Alan Gerganis, gave me what turned out to be a very valuable piece of advice. He said, be very, very careful when you query agents, because I think giving your novel to an agent sometimes before you are done can be like taking your child out of your belly before it's come to term. And you don't want to have the agent influence your writing too much while it's in process. So I waited until I had a completed novel, and I sent a short story, and I said, this is the short story. If you're interested, when I have completed my novel, I will send it to you. I followed that advice. That was what worked for me, and I signed with the first agent that I sent the novel to. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Claire?
Yeah. Yes. And for me, it was a similar thing to some of you. Like so I'm with Rogers, Coleridge and Whiter in London, and they have a sort of a prize. I think it's every 2 years. And I submitted, I mean, in that case, I think you only needed to submit a portion. But I mean, you know, the sort of general advice is to have the whole thing finished. And I think it's like, it can be frustrating for agents, I think, if you sort of approach them and they really like it, but then they come and they're like, well, where is it? And you're like, oh, I haven't finished it yet. So I mean, I think that's good advice to, you know, try and have the novel finished. But the other thing that hasn't come up yet is just, I feel like as you write, and like, you know, there's some amazing people who like write their novel in like, you know, 3 months or something, and hooray, off you go to stardom. But you know, it can be years, and you're showing your work to people, and so it's kind of through that process of kind of interacting. And it doesn't mean you have to go out to parties every night, but like, through that process of kind of finding other writers and interacting, you do, before you know it, kind of build a little bit of a network. And like, as your writing develops, people will kind of, you know, people will sort of know your name, and it will be easier to get in front of agents, you know. So yes, I mean, it's kind of, you know, get your full draft and just keep working, and kind of, you know, not network and like, oh my God, read my manuscript, but, you know, just get out there and meet people a little bit, and it'll happen, you know. Hopefully.
And I think it's important to say that for every rule, there's a story that proves the opposite. I mean,
that's so true. Yeah.
I don't think I had a final draft of Swan Song until it was pried from my hands the day before it went to copy edit. So
yeah,
right.
I actually really enjoyed working with my agent. I'm one of those people who loves being told what to do and being, you know, bouncing ideas off other people. So I didn't mind the kind of collaborative feeling of having her look at it at earlier stages. It's what I love writing screenplays, because you're getting notes from all kinds of directions and you don't have to solve all of the problems yourself.
But I think what should be very encouraging to anyone watching is we have 4 squares on the screen, and each experience was different. So there are a million ways to get there. I think the important thing is to remember what everyone has touched on at some point in this conversation, which is we need good stories. We need great storytellers. That will never die. The industry is hungry for new voices, and that's what's so important about this prize, and about all recognition of great writing, and especially the writing of debut novelists who've worked so long to get here. I have one last question, and then we're out. Because this was such an unusual year, I would just, for fun, love to hear how you found out that you were shortlisted for the McKitterick Prize, and how you celebrated, given that we can't go anywhere. What did you do to just say hurrah? Sara, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think this is really boring, because it's what I'm doing when I find anything out. If I'm not working, I'm working out. I think I was in the middle of a workout. Basically, I'm trying to stick to kind of keep the pandemic pounds at bay. So
well done.
I was probably lifting some kind of weight somewhere, and reading my phone with the other hand.
Regina, how about you?
I write at the kitchen table. So I think I checked my email and I was at the kitchen table, and to reward myself, I have a dog. And so I took him for a walk in the park that afternoon, and there's a little takeout Mexican place, and they make wonderful sangrias. And so I got a sangria and fish tacos.
A woman after my own heart. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And Claire, how about you?
That's awesome. I mean, I think I was at home at my kitchen table also, you know, and I think it was maybe I can't remember what time of day it was, mid-morning or something. And, you know, the kids are home, and, you know, like ordinarily I would love to have something fizzy or something like, but I think it was just the middle of the day, and so we just had cookie time. So that was our celebration. We called the kids in as like, prize guys, come on, cookie time. So.
Well, next year when we're all back in the cathedral again, we'll do a double toast of champagne to in person celebrate, but hopefully some Negronis before. And it's just been amazing. These books are, I'm going to see if I can hold them all with my hands.
Oh.
They're absolutely incredible, as are the other shortlistees in this and the other categories. And everyone should know that now that our lovely bookshops are open again, the Shortlisted Society of Authors Awards books are available from Blackwell's. In the link below, I can read it out loud. It's blackwells.co.uk/bookshop, Collection Society of Authors Awards, etc., etc. But they are at all great booksellers, and please go and support our bookshops and our amazing authors. And it has been a privilege to speak with these three women today, who I'm so proud to call my colleagues. So thank you guys, and thank you for your work. They're incredible books, and I'm so happy for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you. Yeah. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.